I never thought I would be standing in front of a judge explaining why my family's private cemetery had been paved over with asphalt and turned into an HOA parking lot. But there I was, Zachary Edwards, holding a folder full of documents that were about to turn my quiet neighborhood in Asheville, North Carolina, into a legal battleground. It started 3 months ago when I returned from a business trip to find construction crews working on what used to be the small family plot behind my property. My great-great-grandfather had settled this land in 1887, and 5 generations of Edwards men and women rested under those old oak trees. The plot was clearly marked on my property deed, protected by state cemetery laws, and had wrought iron fencing that my grandfather installed in 1952. When I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday afternoon in February, the fence was gone, and 2 bulldozers were flattening the earth. I jumped out of my truck so fast I forgot to close the door. "Hey, stop, what are you doing?" The construction foreman, a burly guy with a hard hat and a clipboard, barely looked up. "HOA parking expansion. You got a problem? Take it up with the board." "That's a cemetery," I said, my voice shaking. "My family's buried there." He shrugged. "I got permits, not my problem." I called the police immediately, but when Officer Martinez arrived, he looked at the permits and shook his head. "Sir, these appear to be in order. This is a civil matter. You will need to contact your HOA." "Officer, there are graves here, human remains. This has to be illegal." "If that's true, you need to get a lawyer and go through the proper channels. I cannot stop permitted construction based on a verbal claim." I spent that evening digging through my files, finding my property deed, the original land survey from 1887, death certificates, and photographs of the cemetery that dated back decades. My hands were shaking as I laid everything out on my dining room table. My wife Sarah had passed away 2 years ago from cancer, and she was buried in that plot next to my parents. The thought of her grave being destroyed made me physically ill. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office in our neighborhood community center. The Pinecrest Hills Homeowners Association had always been strict, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. The receptionist told me that Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president, was available. Patricia was exactly what you would expect. A woman in her late 50s with an aggressively short haircut, designer reading glasses on a chain, and an expression that suggested she had been waiting her whole life to make someone's day miserable. Her office walls were covered with framed copies of HOA violations she had issued over the years, like trophies. "Mr. Edwards," she said without standing or offering to shake my hand, "I wondered when you would show up." "You paved over my family cemetery," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "That's illegal. North Carolina General Statute 65-106 protects burial sites." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "Your so-called cemetery was never properly registered with the county. According to our research, that plot of land falls within common area boundaries as outlined in the HOA charter from 1998. My family has owned this property since 1887. Your HOA did not even exist until 1998. You cannot just retroactively claim land that has been private property for over a century." Patricia pushed a document across her desk. "When you purchased your home in 2015, you signed the HOA agreement, Section 14. Paragraph 3 states that all property boundaries are subject to review and adjustment by the board. We conducted a survey and determined that the area in question belongs to the association." I picked up the document, my hands clenching so hard the paper crumpled. "This is insane. You cannot just take a cemetery." "What I see is an unmaintained, unregistered plot of land that has become an eyesore. Several residents have complained about the condition of that area. The HOA has the right and responsibility to maintain property values." "There are bodies buried there, Patricia. My wife, my parents, my grandparents." She folded her hands on her desk. "I would need to see certified proof of burial from the county. Otherwise, you are just making claims. And even if there were remains, which I doubt, they should have been properly registered. Your failure to follow legal procedures does not constitute an emergency on our part." I left her office before I said something I would regret. My lawyer, Richard Chen, had handled my wife's estate, and I called him from the parking lot. He listened to everything, then let out a long breath. "Zachary, this is serious. If they have actually disturbed human remains, that is a criminal matter. But we need to prove it first. Do you have documentation?" I have death certificates, the original property deed, photographs, everything. Good. Bring it all to my office. We need to file an emergency injunction immediately and contact the North Carolina Office of the State Archaeologist. They handle situations involving unmarked graves and cemetery disturbances. The next few days were a blur of legal filings and phone calls. Richard filed for an emergency temporary restraining order to stop the construction, but the judge denied it because Patricia had produced what appeared to be legitimate surveys showing the land belonged to the HOA. The fact that those surveys contradicted my original 1887 deed did not seem to matter. Meanwhile, the construction continued. By the end of the week, the entire plot had been graded and covered with gravel. I watched from my back porch, helpless, as dump trucks brought in load after load of fill. They were literally burying my family's graves under tons of rock. I contacted the North Carolina Office of the State Archaeologist, and a woman named Dr. Jennifer Walsh returned my call. She was sympathetic, but explained that her office was backlogged with cases, and it could take weeks to send someone out. She did, however, confirm that disturbing marked graves without proper permits was a violation of state law and potentially a felony depending on the circumstances. Document everything, she told me. Take photographs, keep records of who you talk to, save all your communications with the HOA. If this goes to trial, you will need a detailed timeline. I started a journal that night, writing down everything that had happened. I also set up my phone to record every interaction with the HOA. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, so I could legally record conversations as long as I was part of them. The following Monday, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a violation notice for unauthorized structures because apparently the headstones that had not yet been removed were now considered violations of community standards. The letter demanded I remove them within 14 days or face daily fines of $500. I called Richard immediately. They want me to remove my family's headstones. Do not touch anything, he said. This actually helps our case. They are acknowledging the graves existed. Save that letter. I'm going to expedite our motion and request an emergency hearing with Judge Morrison. She does not tolerate this kind of behavior. But getting in front of Judge Morrison took time. Meanwhile, the HOA moved forward with their parking lot construction. By mid-March, they had laid down a base layer of asphalt. I watched from my property line as steamrollers compressed the surface directly over where I knew my wife's grave was located. I threw up in the bushes. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah, about the promises I had made to her before she died. She had wanted to be buried on the family land, next to my parents. She had held my hand in that hospital bed and made me swear I would keep the cemetery maintained, that I would not let our family's history be forgotten. I had failed her. The next morning, I went back to Patricia's office without an appointment. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I walked right past her. Patricia looked up from her computer, annoyed. Mr. Edwards, you need to schedule appointments. You paved over my wife's grave, I said. My voice did not sound like my own. How do you sleep at night? I sleep fine, thank you, and I have already explained that you have provided no credible evidence of any graves. You have some old photographs and documents that may or may not be authentic. For all I know, you fabricated them to try to get out of HOA rules. Fabricated death certificates? Are you serious? She stood up. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you continue to harass me, I will file a restraining order. Harass you? You destroyed a cemetery. The door opened behind me and a security guard entered. He was a young guy, probably early 20s, and he looked uncomfortable. Sir, I need you to leave the premises. I left, but not before taking photographs of everything in Patricia's office, including the permits displayed on her wall. Something about them looked off, and I wanted Richard to examine them closely. Richard called me that afternoon with news. I got us an emergency hearing with Judge Morrison for next Monday. But Zachary, I have to be honest with you, this is going to be difficult. The HOA has documentation showing they followed procedures. We need something concrete that proves those graves exist and that the HOA knew about them. What about my deed? What about state cemetery law? Your deed is old and the property has changed hands multiple times. Each time, the legal description may have been slightly modified. The HOA is claiming that over the years, through various sales and subdivisions, that particular plot became part of the common area. It is a stretch, but they have a surveyor backing them up. A surveyor they paid. Yes, but he is licensed and his survey appears legitimate on paper. We need to prove it is fraudulent, which means we need our own survey. I have already hired someone, but it will take time. We do not have time. They are almost finished with the parking lot. Richard was quiet for a moment. There is one other option. If we can prove there are actually human remains buried there, everything changes. The HOA would be guilty of disturbing graves, which is a felony in North Carolina, but we would need physical proof. You mean dig them up? No, not exactly. There are ground-penetrating radar devices that can detect anomalies in the soil consistent with burials. Coffins, human remains, they all show up differently than undisturbed earth. I know a company that does this for archaeological surveys. If we can get them out there and they find evidence of graves, Judge Morrison will have to stop the construction. How fast can they do it? I will make some calls. 2 days later, a team from Heritage Survey Technologies arrived at my house with what looked like a lawnmower attached to a computer. Dr. Marcus Stone, a forensic archaeologist, explained how ground-penetrating radar worked while his assistant rolled the device across what was now a half-finished parking lot. "We are looking for density changes," Dr. Stone said, watching the screen. "Graves create distinct patterns. The fill is less compact than undisturbed soil, and any remaining casket materials or human bones will show up clearly." Patricia showed up within 10 minutes of them starting, accompanied by 2 HOA board members and a lawyer I had not seen before. "This is HOA property," Patricia announced. "You are trespassing." Dr. Stone did not even look up. "We have a court order allowing this survey pending the emergency hearing. If you interfere, you will be in contempt." Patricia's lawyer, a thin man with a briefcase, stepped forward. "Let me see that order." Richard had anticipated this and handed over a certified copy. The lawyer read it, frowned, then whispered something to Patricia. She looked like she had swallowed something sour. "Fine," she said, "but this is a waste of everyone's time. There is nothing buried here." Dr. Stone worked for 3 hours, methodically covering the entire parking lot area. I watched the screen over his shoulder, not really understanding what I was seeing, but desperately hoping for something, anything, that would prove I was right. Then the display changed. A clear rectangular anomaly appeared, about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. Then another, and another. By the time Dr. Stone finished, he had identified 8 distinct signatures consistent with coffin burials. "These are graves," he said, pointing at the screen. "No question. You can see the disturbed soil pattern, the density changes, and these linear features here are almost certainly casket remains. This one here, for example, shows evidence of a metal casket, probably relatively modern. These others are older, likely wood that has mostly decomposed, but you can still see the outline." Patricia had gone pale. "That's impossible." "Madam, I have been doing this for 20 years. These are burial sites, and based on the soil compaction, they were significantly disturbed recently, probably within the last month." Her lawyer was already on his phone, walking away to have a private conversation. The other board members looked at each other nervously. One of them, a man named Doug, spoke up. "Patricia, if there really are graves here, we need to stop construction immediately. This could be a criminal matter." "Shut up, Doug," she snapped. Richard was already on his phone too, and I heard him saying something about contacting the district attorney's office. This had just escalated beyond a civil dispute. Dr. Stone packed up his equipment and handed Richard a USB drive. "This has all the data. I will write up a formal report and have it to you by tomorrow morning. You should also contact the State Bureau of Investigation. If human remains were knowingly disturbed, that is grave desecration under North Carolina law, which is a Class 1 felony." After they left, I stood in the parking lot, looking at the fresh asphalt. Somewhere under my feet was Sarah. The thought made my chest tight. Patricia approached me, and for the first time she looked uncertain. "Mr. Edwards, perhaps we can work something out. The HOA is willing to negotiate a settlement." "A settlement?" I could not believe what I was hearing. "You destroyed my family's graves and you want to negotiate?" It was a mistake, an unfortunate misunderstanding. We can relocate the parking lot and perhaps dedicate the cemetery area as a memorial garden. After you already paved over it?" Her lawyer had returned and put a hand on her arm. "Mrs. Whitmore, do not say anything else." But she shook him off. "Look, the board was acting on bad information. Our surveyor made an error. We can fix this." "Your surveyor lied," I said. "And you knew about the cemetery. I told you myself. You did this anyway." "I thought you were exaggerating. People claim all sorts of things to avoid HOA regulations." Richard stepped between us. "All communication needs to go through our offices now, Mr. Edwards. Do not say anything else." The emergency hearing was scheduled for that Monday, but by Friday, the situation had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Someone had tipped off the local news, and by Friday evening, every station in Asheville was running stories about the HOA that paved over a family cemetery. My phone would not stop ringing with interview requests. Richard advised me to do one carefully controlled interview with the most credible local reporter, and I sat down with Channel 7's Jessica Reynolds on my back porch, overlooking the parking lot. "Mr. Edwards, can you explain what happened here?" she asked, her camera operator filming the paved area behind us. I told the whole story, showed her the death certificates, the old photographs of the cemetery, the ground-penetrating radar results. By the time we finished, she had tears in her eyes. "This is absolutely heartbreaking," she said. "Have you heard anything from the HOA? They want to negotiate, but you cannot negotiate with something like this. They destroyed something irreplaceable." The interview aired that night, and by Saturday morning, it had gone viral. National news outlets picked it up. The HOA's phone lines were flooded with angry calls. Someone started a petition demanding Patricia Whitmore's resignation that gathered 50,000 signatures in 24 hours. The district attorney's office contacted Richard on Saturday afternoon. They were opening a criminal investigation into possible grave desecration and fraud. The surveyor who had prepared the false property boundaries was being investigated for professional misconduct. Sunday night, I barely slept. The hearing was at 9 in the morning, and everything depended on Judge Morrison's decision. Richard had prepared a comprehensive brief with all our evidence: my property deeds, the death certificates, photographs spanning decades, and Dr. Stone's ground-penetrating radar survey. We were asking for an emergency order to halt all work, require the HOA to remove the parking lot, and allow proper exhumation and reburial of the remains. I arrived at the courthouse 40 minutes early. Richard was already there, reviewing his notes. Patricia showed up with not one, but 3 lawyers, all carrying expensive briefcases. She would not make eye contact with me. Judge Morrison's courtroom was old-fashioned, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings. She was a woman in her mid-60s with gray hair and a reputation for being absolutely no-nonsense. She'd been a judge in Buncombe County for 20 years, and lawyers either loved or feared her depending on whether they did their homework. The bailiff called us to order, and Judge Morrison entered. We all stood. "Be seated," she said, opening a folder. "I have reviewed the briefs from both parties, and I have some questions. Mr. Chen, your client claims that the Pinecrest Hills HOA knowingly paved over a family cemetery. That is a serious allegation." Richard stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence that the cemetery has been on this property since 1887 and that Mr. Edwards explicitly informed the HOA of its existence before construction began. We also have ground-penetrating radar evidence confirming the presence of at least 8 burial sites." "Your Honor," Patricia's lead attorney stood, "the HOA disputes many of these claims. While we acknowledge that Mr. Edwards possesses some historical documents, the property boundaries have changed significantly over the years. Our survey clearly shows that the disputed area falls within HOA common space." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "I have seen your survey. I have also seen the original 1887 deed. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that an HOA charter from 1998 supersedes a deed from 1887? "Not supersedes, Your Honor, but clarifies. The property has been subdivided multiple times. Each subdivision modified the boundaries. By the time the current subdivision was created and the HOA established, that particular plot had become common area. Except that Mr. Edwards's current deed, which he received in 2015, explicitly mentions the family cemetery and excludes it from any common areas. Did you review his current deed? The lawyer hesitated. Your Honor, we believed that clause to be merely historical notation, not legally binding. You believed wrong. When Mr. Edwards purchased his property, the cemetery was explicitly preserved in the deed. That means it is private property, not HOA common area, regardless of what your survey says. Patricia's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, the cemetery was never properly registered with the county. North Carolina law requires cemeteries to be registered. That law was enacted in 1977, Judge Morrison said, clearly having done her homework. This cemetery predates that requirement by 90 years. North Carolina General Statute 65-106 specifically protects historical family cemeteries regardless of registration status. Did you research this before authorizing construction? Silence. Judge Morrison looked at Patricia directly. Mrs. Whitmore, did Mr. Edwards inform you about the cemetery before construction began? Patricia's lawyers immediately objected. Your Honor, we advise our client not to answer that question, as it may be relevant to the criminal investigation. So that is a yes, Judge Morrison said dryly. Here is what is going to happen. I am issuing an immediate order halting all construction on this parking lot. The HOA will cease any and all work immediately. Second, I am ordering the HOA to hire, at their own expense, a licensed forensic archaeological team to properly exhume any human remains buried at this site. Those remains will be cataloged, treated with appropriate dignity, and reburied according to Mr. Edwards' wishes. Third, the HOA will restore the cemetery to its original condition, including replacing any headstones or markers that were destroyed. Fourth, the HOA will pay all of Mr. Edwards' legal fees. Do you understand? Patricia's lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. Finally, the lead counsel spoke. Your Honor, the cost of exhumation and reburial could be substantial. We request that costs be shared. Your client paved over a cemetery, Judge Morrison said, her voice cold. The HOA will pay every cent. If you cannot afford it, you should have thought about that before you bulldozed someone's family graves. Now, I am also referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you get a criminal defense attorney. Patricia stood up, her face red. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We were trying to improve the neighborhood. This man is holding up progress with some old graves that nobody has visited in years. Judge Morrison's expression could have frozen fire. Mrs. Whitmore, sit down and be quiet, or I will hold you in contempt. This hearing is adjourned. I want a detailed plan for exhumation and restoration on my desk within 2 weeks. Court dismissed. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Richard was grinning. That went better than I hoped. Morrison destroyed them. What happens now? Now they have to fix it. And if the criminal investigation finds that they knowingly destroyed the graves, which seems likely, Patricia and possibly other board members could face felony charges. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. The district attorney assigned an investigator to the case, and they subpoenaed all of the HOA's records. It turned out that multiple residents had complained about the construction when it started, warning the board that there were graves on that site. Patricia had ignored all of them. Even worse, the surveyor admitted under questioning that Patricia had specifically asked him to draw the boundaries to include the cemetery area, even though he had expressed concerns about the legality of doing so. The forensic archaeological team began work on a cold Monday morning in April. I watched as they carefully removed the asphalt layer by layer. It was painstaking work, done with small tools to avoid damaging anything underneath. I had to leave when they started actually uncovering the graves. It was too much. Dr. Stone called me that evening. Mr. Edwards, we have located all 8 burial sites. The caskets are damaged, but we are able to carefully exhume the remains. I want to prepare you, though. This is going to be difficult. Some of the graves were significantly disturbed by the construction equipment. How bad? Your wife's casket was partially crushed by heavy machinery. We will do everything we can to preserve her remains, but there is substantial damage. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on my porch and cried for the first time since Sarah's funeral. The exhumation took 3 weeks. Each burial was carefully excavated, documented, and prepared for reburial. The HOA was forced to pay for new caskets for every grave, since the originals were too damaged. They also had to pay for a specialist to restore the headstones that had been broken during the initial demolition. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation was wrapping up. The district attorney held a press conference announcing that Patricia Whitmore and 2 other HOA board members were being charged with felony grave desecration under North Carolina General Statute 14-148. The surveyor was charged with fraud. All 4 faced up to 3 years in prison if convicted. Patricia resigned from the HOA board the same day the charges were announced. The 2 other board members also resigned. An emergency HOA election was held, and the entire board was replaced with people who actually seemed to have common sense. The new board president, a retired teacher named Ellen Rodriguez, contacted me personally. "Mr. Edwards, on behalf of the association, I want to apologize for everything that happened. This should never have occurred. We are committed to doing whatever it takes to make this right." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that. We are also proposing to create a formal historical preservation committee to identify and protect any other significant sites in the neighborhood. We never want something like this to happen again." The restoration work began in May. The parking lot was completely removed and landscapers worked to restore the land to its original contours. A historian helped me identify native plants that would have been common in the 1880s, and we planted oak saplings to replace the mature trees that had been destroyed. They would not reach their full size in my lifetime, but maybe my grandchildren would see them. The reburial ceremony was held on a Saturday morning in late May. All 8 of my family members were laid to rest again, this time with a formal service attended by dozens of people from the community. People I had never met showed up to pay their respects, angry about what had happened and wanting to show support. Richard had found a stonemason who specialized in historical restoration, and he had repaired the original headstones. Sarah's headstone was placed at her grave, and I knelt there for a long time, my hand on the cold marble. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I should have protected you better, but they cannot hurt you anymore." The criminal trial was set for September. The district attorney was confident about getting convictions, especially given how much evidence there was, and the fact that the surveyor had agreed to testify against Patricia in exchange for a reduced sentence. I attended every day of Patricia's trial. She had hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that she had relied on professional advice from the surveyor and did not knowingly break the law. But the prosecutor had emails proving that multiple people had warned her about the graves and that she had dismissed their concerns. One email was particularly damning. A neighbor had written, "Patricia, I am telling you for the 3rd time, there are graves on that land. You cannot pave over them." Patricia had responded, "Stop bothering me with this nonsense." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison handled the sentencing. She gave Patricia 18 months in prison with credit for time served. The other 2 board members got probation and community service, since they had played lesser roles and had been largely following Patricia's lead. The surveyor lost his license and got 6 months in jail. When Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked at me. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, "I hope you are happy." "I am not," I told her honestly. "I wish none of this had ever happened. I wish you had just listened when I told you about the cemetery." The civil lawsuit took longer. Richard filed suit against the HOA for emotional distress, destruction of property, and violation of my civil rights. The new HOA board wanted to settle, and we reached an agreement in October. They paid me $300,000 and formally dedicated the cemetery as a protected historical site. They also erected a historical marker explaining the significance of the site and the Edwards family's role in settling the area. The money did not make up for what happened, but it did allow me to establish a trust for the cemetery's perpetual maintenance. No matter who owns my property in the future, there will always be funds available to care for those graves. By December, the cemetery looked better than it had in years. The new trees were growing, the grass was thick and green, And someone from the Historical Society's volunteer program came by twice a month to help with maintenance. They had even found photographs of what the original fence looked like and recreated it exactly. I stood at Sarah's grave on Christmas Eve, the same way I had every year since she died. Snow was falling lightly, dusting the headstones with white. "We made it," I said quietly. "They tried to erase you, to erase all of us, but we won. You are safe now. I promise." The whole experience had taught me something important about standing up for what is right, even when it seems impossible. When I first saw those bulldozers, I had felt helpless, but I had documented everything, followed the legal process, and refused to back down. And in the end, justice had prevailed. The neighborhood was different now, too. People paid attention to HOA meetings. They questioned decisions instead of just going along with whatever the board wanted. The new board actually listened to residents and worked to improve the community without trampling on people's rights. I got letters from people all over the country who had seen the news stories. Many of them were fighting their own battles with overreaching HOAs. I tried to respond to as many as I could, sharing what I had learned. Document everything. Know your rights. Do not be afraid to fight back when something is wrong. In January, almost a year after the nightmare began, I received a letter from the North Carolina Historical Society. They wanted to add the Edwards family cemetery to the State Historical Register, which would provide additional legal protections and recognition of its significance. I filled out the paperwork the same day. The final piece came in February. Judge Morrison called me to her chambers, which was unusual. Richard came with me, unsure what to expect. She had a document on her desk. "Mr. Edwards, I wanted to give you this personally. It is a permanent injunction against the Pinecrest Hills HOA or any future property owner from disturbing the cemetery site. It is enforceable in perpetuity, which means it will remain in effect forever. No one can ever build on that land or disturb those graves again." I took the document with shaking hands. "Thank you, Your Honor. This means everything." "You fought hard for your family," she said. "A lot of people would have given up when faced with what seemed like insurmountable opposition. You did the right thing by seeing it through." That document now hangs in my living room, framed next to photographs of the cemetery from different eras. When people visit, I tell them the story. Some are horrified by what happened. Others are inspired that justice ultimately prevailed. All of them leave with a better understanding of how important it is to know your rights and defend them. The Edwards family cemetery sits peacefully now on my property in Asheville, protected by state law, federal historical designations, and a permanent court order. The oak saplings are growing taller each year. The fence gleams in the sunlight. The headstones stand straight and proud, telling the stories of the people buried beneath them. Sarah's grave is marked with fresh flowers that I bring every week. Sometimes I sit on the bench I installed nearby and tell her about my day. I tell her about the legal victory, about Patricia going to prison, about all the people who helped us win. I tell her that she can rest in peace now, that no one will ever disturb her again. And every time I drive past that spot, I remember those terrible days when it was covered in asphalt, when it seemed like we had lost everything that mattered. But we did not lose. We fought back, and we won. The parking lot is gone, replaced with green grass and growing trees and the dignity that my family deserves. Sometimes, neighbors stop by to visit the cemetery. It has become a point of pride in the community, a reminder of the area's history and the importance of preservation. School groups occasionally tour it as part of local history projects. The Historical Society maintains a page about it on their website. Life has moved forward, but I will never forget what happened. I will never forget standing at the edge of that parking lot, knowing my wife was buried somewhere beneath the asphalt. I will never forget the feeling of helplessness or the determination that followed when I decided to fight back. Judge Morrison once told me that the law exists to protect people from those who abuse power. Patricia Whitmore had power as HOA president, and she abused it terribly. She thought she could do whatever she wanted, that her position made her untouchable. But the law proved stronger than her authority, and justice prevailed. The story made national news, and it led to conversations about HOA reform across the country. Several states passed new laws limiting HOA authority and providing better protection for property owners. North Carolina strengthened its cemetery protection statutes. The surveyor's professional organization implemented new ethics requirements. Good came from the nightmare, but I would give it all back if I could have prevented it from happening in the first place. I would give anything to have spared Sarah's grave from being crushed under bulldozers. But since I cannot change the past, I focus on making sure her memory and the memory of all my family buried there is preserved and honored. On warm evenings, I sit on my back porch with a beer and look at the cemetery. The setting sun casts long shadows across the headstones. Birds sing in the trees. Everything is peaceful. This is how it was always supposed to be, and this is how it will remain, protected by law and by my eternal vigilance. The fight cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, even with the settlement. It cost me months of stress and sleepless nights. It cost me peace of mind in ways that are hard to quantify. But it was worth every penny and every moment of anxiety because some things are too important to surrender. Your family's history matters. Your ancestors matter. Their final resting places deserve respect and protection. When someone tries to take that away, you fight back with everything you have. You find good lawyers, and you document everything, and you do not quit until justice is served. That is what I learned from the day I came home to find bulldozers on my family's graves, and that is what I carried with me through the whole ordeal until the day I stood with Judge Morrison and a backhoe, removing the parking lot and restoring what should never have been disturbed. The Edwards family cemetery stands now as it should, protected and honored, a testament to 5 generations of my family, and to the importance of standing up for what is right. Patricia Whitmore served her time in prison and was released last month. I heard she moved to a different state. I hope she learned something from what happened, though I suspect she probably still thinks she was the victim. As for me, I continue to maintain the cemetery with the help of the Historical Society volunteers. I have started writing a book about my family's history, using documents and photographs I found during the legal battle. My grandchildren will know where they come from and who came before them. The cemetery will teach them about their heritage and about the importance of fighting for what matters. Every legal document, every photograph, every piece of evidence I gathered during those terrible months is preserved in a fireproof safe in my home. If anyone ever challenges the cemetery's protected status again, they will face an even more prepared opponent. But I do not think that will happen. The permanent injunction Judge Morrison issued is crystal clear, and the criminal convictions send a strong message about the consequences of grave desecration. The neighborhood is better now, too. The new HOA board actually cares about the community rather than just enforcing petty rules. They host events that bring people together. They maintain common areas without overstepping their authority. They remember what happened when power went unchecked, and they work hard to make sure it never happens again. I sometimes give talks at local community centers about HOA rights and property owner protections. I share my story and encourage people to stay informed and engaged. I tell them about the warning signs I should have noticed earlier, about the importance of reading and understanding your property deed, about knowing your rights under state law. Most importantly, I tell them never to give up when they know they are right. The system works if you work the system. Yes, it took months and cost money and caused incredible stress, but justice was served. The law protected what needed protecting. The guilty were punished, and what was destroyed was restored as much as possible. As I finish writing this, I'm sitting on my porch watching the sunset over the Edwards family cemetery. The new oak trees are silhouetted against the orange sky. The headstones glow in the fading light. Everything is exactly as it should be. Sarah rests in peace, surrounded by generations of Edwards men and women who built this community and who deserve to be remembered. This is what I fought for, and this is what I won. Not just for myself, but for everyone who came before me and everyone who will come after. The parking lot is gone, destroyed by legal authority and physical labor. In its place stands something infinitely more valuable, a protected piece of history, a family's legacy, and proof that when regular people stand up against injustice, they can win. Judge Morrison told me at the end of the trial that this case would be remembered as an important precedent for property rights and cemetery protection. Other families facing similar situations have cited our case in their own legal battles. Some have won because we won first. That gives me satisfaction beyond what I can express. The backhoe that removed the parking lot worked for 3 days, carefully taking up the asphalt layer by layer under the supervision of the archaeological team. I watched every moment, standing at the edge of the site with Judge Morrison beside me. She had come to personally oversee the initial work, wanting to ensure her orders were followed exactly. "This is how the law should work," she had said to me that first day. "Justice delayed but not denied." And she was right. Justice came, slow and methodical like that backhoe removing the asphalt, but it came. And when it arrived, it brought with it not just restoration of what was destroyed, but also accountability for those who caused the destruction. The story ends here, in peace and restoration, with lessons learned and justice served. The Edwards family cemetery will stand for generations to come, protected by law and by memory, a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of defending what matters most. And I will be there, maintaining it and honoring it, until the day I join my wife and my ancestors in that sacred ground.